This week on the Hot Mess Therapy podcast, we interview yoga studio owner, life coach, and herbalist Lindsay Hess. We discuss what trauma awareness looks like, how to incorporate it into a business model, and we also talk about yoga, herbalism, and a whole lot more. Welcome to the Hot Mess Therapy podcast, where we share stories of life, mental health, addiction, and how we deal with it. And now your hosts, Stephen and KB. But just so you know, we're not actual therapists. This is episode 10. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Hot Mess Therapy podcast with your host, Stephen O'Sullivan, and the illustrious KB. Wow, the crowd goes wild. And today we have a guest. Our guest is Lindsay Hess. And Lindsay is inspired by working with women of all ages and youth to find peace and healing within body, mind, and spirit. She is passionate about holistic health and healing and hopes to share her knowledge and teachings with women looking to do deep inner work on themselves and within their body. Through yoga, meditation, and herbalism, she hopes to help bring balance to the physical and mental bodies of women. Let's welcome our guest, Lindsay Hess.
Hello,
the crowd
Lindsay.
Goes wild. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome to the show.
Thanks.
I'm
good to have you here. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So, like we said before we started, usually we do a little check-in, see how everyone is doing. And so, KB, what's the good word?
I'm doing good. I had a really good breakthrough with a student today. Through pizza, of course. Pizza will win anyone over, okay?
It's
certainly wins me over.
For world peace.
Pizza is eternal. And then last night I did a bunch of crafting. So I'm a little on the tired side because I got super into it. I was hyper focused. I finished like 3 projects. So I was up until like 1 or 2.
Like what? You can't just leave us with that. What kind of crafting were you doing?
I was crocheting and knitting.
Oh, yes. You are the new queen of crochet, aren't you?
Yeah. Absolutely. I do love me some crochet.
I have yet to receive any mittens or stockings.
Oh man, I'm sending a pair of mittens off today, actually.
Okay, well, no, I don't really don't do that. They use a lot of yarn.
I'll send you like a beard cover or something.
Perfect, beard warmer.
Beard warmer. There we go.
Next winter. All right. And Lindsay, how are you doing?
I'm doing so good. It's a beautiful day in Colorado. Actually, it's cloudy, but if you are from Colorado or know anything about it, we don't get a lot of rain here necessarily. So
okay.
Soak up the rainy days.
Nice. Okay, great. Well, you guys want to jump into it? Oh, me, I'm doing fine.
Steve, how are you doing?
I'm doing better today. I've actually the last few days I have had some challenges with my mental state, which happens. Luckily, I am in a 5-day challenge called Come to the Fire. It's being put on by some of the members of the Global Healing Collective, which I talk about just about every episode. And it has really helped me get into a better state. I'm actually feeling real good today and doing better. So, having a place to go with like-minded people can be really good. It's really good for me. So I'm fortunate, and I'm stoked and ready and pumped and all those good things.
So happy to hear that.
Yeah, thanks. So, Lindsay, do you want to tell us your company name? I didn't mention that.
Yeah, so I'm the founder of Wanderlotus Yoga and Wellness out here in Colorado.
Okay,
cool.
And
Awesome.
What do you do?
So I focus on yoga and meditation practices. I've currently just added another modality into my business, which will be focused more on lifestyle coaching and mentorship. Whether you're looking for spirituality or movement or, mentorship, coaching, those types of things.
Cool.
So I like to integrate I can't just pick one holistic modality. I want to do it all. So if it has yoga, breathing, herbs, we're summing it up there pretty nicely.
Love that.
So one of the things that KB told me about you is that you deal with trauma aware. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Can you tell everybody what trauma aware is and how that relates to your business?
Yes. So I am a trauma aware certified yoga teacher. There are many stages of trauma certifications within yoga. So there's trauma informed and trauma sensitive. I am not those two. I am trauma aware. So on the vast scale of everything trauma, I am very early on, still in the doorway, by no means a, expert in any means. But so I'm trauma aware, which means that when I step on my mat and I'm working with people, I am trying to notice things and also be aware of myself and the way that I'm coming off in a way to create an all-inclusive safe space for everybody.
Okay, so this really comes from you then.
Right? There's, when we think about trauma aware in a yoga perspective, there's certain things, for instance, like I wouldn't do hands-on modifications. I would keep no physical touch. Mm-hmm. And, I don't say I'm teaching a trauma aware class specifically. I just chose as a teacher to choose that modality as something that I am aware of. So I might not do everything in a class that would be considered trauma, sensitive, but I definitely take it into perspective when I'm teaching. So it even comes down to how you have people set up. Maybe you don't want to have their backs towards the door, or you don't want to dim the lights at the end of class, or even just verbal language. Sometimes we don't use down dog or child's pose. We just steer clear of those types of words. We really keep it to body and movement. And we just take away the words posture and pose and keep it with form,
Mm-hmm. Okay. Right. So it's, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So I have a question for you, Lindsay. So how can you take trauma aware more into your social life? So I know that we're talking like professionally, but how could you also do that socially?
Gosh, that's a great question. I guess when you say socially, I think of like interacting with maybe people or friends.
Right.
And I think, at this point, having lived through 2020, we have all on some level experienced a trauma, surfacing from COVID here. And I think just really understanding that we have to go forward into our relationships with other humans, friends or not, without judgment, and we can't really understand, how something affected somebody or what they went through. And so just being more inclusive and aware, understanding that people are maybe communicating their needs to us in ways that maybe we didn't see before.
I love that perspective. I love that.
So beyond language, beyond being aware of people's potential for having experienced trauma gives them a safe place to be, to learn, to grow. Am I hitting the mark here?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. That's amazing. I've not heard of this before. This is all new to me. I've done yoga a few times, but I'm way out of it when it comes to any of the changes and new things. Is this a relatively new thing, or is this something that's been around for a while?
I would say the studies are definitely progressive right now. I think kind of around the 80s, they started doing more studies so on PTSD. And that's sort of where it started coming to light on those types of those studies. But there's a great book. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. And the author is a hard name to pronounce. So The Body Keeps the Score. It's a great book to listen to. And it talks about how, trauma can appear psychologically and mentally, but that it also can be retained into our bodies. And so, especially in a modality of yoga where we are moving our bodies, and I talk a lot about in class of, we're moving stuck and stagnant energy out of the body. And, as that energy moves, things might arise, things might come up, those things might come to the surface. And so really trying to cultivate that safe space for practitioners is super important, and just holding a safe space, holding space for people. So kind of looping back around to how can you incorporate that socially, just holding space for your friends and your families as things come up and things surface as we start to process things in our life that are perceived as trauma.
Mm-hmm. And trauma can be many, many different things. It's something that, as we talked about in the pre-interview, KB and I did a whole episode on trauma, and we mostly talked about our own personal trauma. There are many, many types of trauma, and it's a personal experience rather than a label per se. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I would agree with that.
Okay.
Sorry, you're asking me.
No, you're not allowed to talk. Lindsay, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so trauma is a response from a deeply distressing or overwhelming event that hinders individuals' ability to cope. So, it's really, I don't feel like it's fair to categorize or determine somebody else's trauma, and really just letting that exist as what it is to that person, and it's real within them, and just how we move forward as a society and as a human race and as people, I think is so important. With being trauma aware, I feel like creating awareness is sort of where I'm trying to find my direction towards. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm really passionate about how can we take trauma aware, for instance, off of the yoga mat and into other areas of the professional world. So I manage a yoga studio and I run my own yoga business. And I also manage my business partner's business, which is a massage office. Mm-hmm. And so we've talked about integrating ideas and practices for our staff to be more aware and trauma aware of our clients. So, like I said, we have considered the ideas of, maybe not having people facing their back to the door, or being more aware of the type of music that's playing or the volume of music. Consistency, letting people know what to expect. That's another really important element. So starting on time, finishing on time, letting your client know when it's just how the session is going to lay out. Mm-hmm. We do an intake and then we move into the session. So, and then also having a choice. That's super important. A lot of times you walk into a massage and they're like, okay, we're going to start you face down. Here we say, what would you prefer? Would you prefer to start face down or face up? Kind of giving them the choice. And so just by integrating these elements into a different business practice, it makes me super passionate about, how can other businesses start to teach their employees about being trauma aware when it comes to dealing with the public and dealing with their clientele.
Interesting.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that aspect where you give them a choice, you let them know what's going to happen. That's great. What a great way to approach a business model. And I feel like that's ultimately, it sounds like that's kind of an easy transition. Like, I feel like a lot of places could have those approach and it wouldn't change the whole business model, Right.
And I think, especially just after COVID, I think we're going to have to start tapping into this awareness. And I know I keep saying this word, but it truly is. It's just awareness, Well,
I'm a big fan of massage. Back when I lived in California, I would trade. I would do work on websites and do some other stuff in trade with. There were 3 different massage therapists that I knew and appreciated, and but I have had a lot of physical trauma, and one of them was primarily a sports massage therapist, and I would always tell her, not deep. I can't tolerate the deep pressure, because what would happen was I'd be in pain for days afterwards. And that was not my goal. I went to feel better, and she would insist on doing it her way. And I didn't like that. It was like, I know exactly what I want. I know my body really well. I know what I need and what I want. Even if doesn't make her happy, it was what I desired. And she never would listen to me. And that always bothered me. And I like the idea of choices of music, of the way you face and the way you start. It gives a lot of, gives the power to the person receiving the massage. I think that's an incredible idea. So what other kind of businesses could you bring this to?
So I've been thinking about that. I was in the service industry for the last 15 years of my life. And I was kind of trying to think about some circumstances that would be doable in that setting. For instance, somebody walks in and the host is standing there and they ask for a corner booth in a quiet place. I can vouch, even, back in the day in my younger years, and I'm sure this still happens, kind of have that eye roll of like, okay, like this is going to be a high maintenance table, or, and just with age and perspective and this awareness, I'm like, okay, well, that is that person communicating their needs, and we need to hold space and listen to that. Maybe that woman's husband is a Vietnam War vet who is going to be triggered if his back is towards the door. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
Or is going to be triggered if he's too close to the kitchen and, there's things banging around. So just coming from a place of compassion instead of judgment in that type of situation, and saying, hey, we don't have to understand why these needs need to be met, but we need to just honor, that space. And I think it's so important, just the communication aspect of it. Being a trauma survivor, sometimes it's hard to just communicate what you need. Sometimes you don't even know what you need. And so if we have somebody that can come to us and say, this is what I would like, or this is what I would need, then just holding that space without judgment.
I love that, because that might be a huge step for them, is communicating that. So I love that, acknowledging and realizing, hey, maybe this is something that's hard for them, and respecting that. I had an old friend that used to tell me when anyone ever cut her off or was speeding by her, I was like, well, maybe it's a husband whose wife is in labor. And that has changed my perspective on every time I get cut off, instead of being like, "Meh," like screw you, whatever. I'm like, oh, maybe someone's in labor.
Absolutely. I learned that one too. That's a good way to diffuse your judgment.
Yeah.
I love that. So this brings up to me kind of, I don't know how to say it, but I'll just say world ignorance. How do you bring this out into the world at large? It's not, I hang out in places where there's people who think like us, because those are my people. But there's lots of people who wouldn't understand, wouldn't care, wouldn't want to take the time, don't want to learn. How do you get that out to the general population? I think this is really important.
That's a great question. And, it's sort of just like, how do you get everybody to show up to yoga? Yeah. There's just some people that are like, never going to do it.
Right. Yeah.
I think it just takes knowledge and wanting to share that knowledge and starting up conversations and, just sharing what you know. Like I said, I'm not an expert in this field. I'm very early on in my learnings with this, but I feel like because I am aware, I want to help create awareness in others. Mm-hmm. And, we can't force people to change, and we can't, put on expectations of others. But we can just share what we know. And, sometimes if you're doing something that's trauma aware, you don't need to say like, oh, this is trauma aware. I mean, if you want to make it a teaching moment, you can, but I think just holding safe space is what it really comes down to. And the presence you bring to somebody or others, people will gravitate towards where they feel included, where they feel safe.
Yeah.
And it'll eventually
just by doing what you're doing, you are really bringing it to the world.
I think so.
Yeah.
I love that.
That is awesome.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So many questions.
There's so many questions. I know.
So I am just curious, when you say hold space, how do you hold space? So as a professional, as a friend, as just a human living in the world, how do you hold space for someone?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. This is something that's so important in yoga too. Actively listening, I think, is important. That's a big one. Holding space for silence. Sometimes, that awkward silence doesn't have to be awkward. It can just be.
Right.
I guess I'm constantly referring to a yoga class when we're having this conversation, but
sure.
The way that I hold space is create an inviting environment, the lighting, the music. You were kind of referring to this as a friend. Obviously you're not like maybe inviting your friends over, turning the lights on, but yeah, I think it comes down to the environment that you are in, and not just external environment, but the internal environment. Your vibe attracts your tribe kind of mentality. And
that's a writer downer.
Yeah. Maybe the title.
I like it. Yeah.
Ooh.
There you go.
So, yeah, I think holding space includes actively listening and holding space for silence.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you.
I'm going to throw my 2 cents worth in because I'm in a lot of groups where someone is holding space, and it's it really is a sort of an internal thing where they create, I'm waving my arms like people can see us. They create a space where where you're protected, where you're safe, where you can share what you want to, where you can be comfortable. There's no judgment. It's you can really be you authentically and not have to worry about what other people think or what they might say or any of those sorts of things. When I was training to be a shaman, there's a ceremony to open sacred space, and that happened before each class, and we closed sacred space at the end of each class, and that was a protection in a way, a spiritual protection for the people who were in the class, not only from each other but from the world. I don't know, evil energy, bad vibes, that sort of thing. And it's integral to spiritual growth, at least from my perspective.
So I lead a women's circle, and sometimes when we're checking in, things come up when you're, how's your last month been? What's going on? And, at the beginning of the circle, we establish that, this is a safe space to feel whatever comes up, and, you're here without judgment. And so sometimes we do see somebody cry or have an emotional release. Even in a yoga class, you put somebody into a deep hip opener, and sometimes that can create some release. And I think holding space branches out into that, as well as not trying to fix it. It's hard to tell a healer, hey, this person's having an emotional release, but don't run over there and do anything.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what you need to do, is you need to just stay where you're at and let that person process their emotional release in their own way. We don't need to fix it. We don't need to do anything about it. We just need to hold space. Going over there and addressing somebody might actually trigger a further response. They might become embarrassed, or, they might have a further release, so sometimes just holding the space, letting them experience their experience, so that you can still continue to hold space for the other people in the room who are having a totally different experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing for people to do especially when someone cries. They want to run over and hug them or bring them a tissue or intervene some way. And KB and I talked about this on another
that's what I was
episode,
going to say.
right? Yeah. It's so uncomfortable for people. They want to get the relief from that discomfort, right? And they're not really thinking about the other person.
Yeah, it almost comes from a selfish, I don't want to say selfish, but I feel like by trying to fix that other person and make them feel better, it's more about you feel awkward that this person is crying, rather than and you want to fix them rather than just letting them be and letting them release that emotion.
The intention becomes about easing your discomfort as opposed to letting them establish their needs and their release.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Very interesting.
So,
we both have so many questions. No, stop apologizing. You're just the most fascinating guest we've had, Lindsay.
I know.
Oh my goodness. I feel so honored.
So, Lindsay, I know that we talked about the 4 F's relating to trauma. Could we get into those a little bit?
Sure. Yeah.
So what are the 4 F's and what do they look like related to trauma?
Yes. So we have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And these are typically when you are in a traumatic situation that is currently happening. Typically, someone will respond with one of these responses. I've tried to I've tried to think through in my life, which one am I? And I don't think that there's a specific one necessarily for how you are. I think each situation brings its own different aspect. And so maybe you guys have some experiences too about, can you think of a time where your response was one versus another in a situation?
Oh yeah.
And just to clarify, fawning is people pleasing to diffuse conflict. And this is kind of a newer idea. A lot of trauma focused people on Instagram and social media. This is kind of a new surfacing idea, but I think it's so important because it truly is, you're not holding a boundary line in yourself to make others happy.
Love that.
Yeah, that's one I had to learn, because that was certainly a big way that I responded to just about everything was people pleasing. I submit to you to do as you will to make you happy, make you feel comfortable, make you feel better. And most of the time it just made things worse.
Yeah.
It was not a good tool for me.
And I feel like it makes you almost hold some resentment towards people. So I think fawning is probably my actually biggest trauma response. I have a hard time setting boundaries and saying no. So I think that is actually, even if I'm in a not entirely safe situation, I'll be like, I'll just people please to try and get out of it instead of just setting those boundaries and saying no. I think fawning I resonate with the most, actually.
I think fawning hits the psychological category of trauma, whereas fight or flight might be if you're in physical harm, but you might notice that those are the ones that you steer towards. I think fawning is more a trauma response to wanting to keep the peace, because past trauma has taught you that, when you don't keep the peace, is there psychological issues that come with that.
Right.
That
like that. So freeze and
yeah.
fawn are more psychological, and then flight and fight are more physical responses. Got it.
I think it could fall that way. I definitely wouldn't want to put them into a certain category or corner, because I think there would definitely be some incidences that could go either way. But I guess I'm just thinking, narcissistic abuse, essentially, you could see that fawning.
You've met my ex, huh?
Awesome.
Sorry, I had to throw that in there. So can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
We're talking about trauma, and you are trauma aware. Have you suffered trauma in your life?
Yes. So 5 years ago, lost my mom suddenly to a heart condition. It was a known condition, but the death was very sudden. Mm-hmm. I was 25 years old, so I was, not ready to lose my mom by any means.
Yeah.
And a lot happened with that, as I look back on it now, being a little bit more trauma aware, I was in complete denial. As it was happening, it was like, okay, well, this isn't happening. And then I went right into not processing any emotion and picking up all the pieces. I spent 2 years, getting everything tied end, loose ends tied, without processing anything. And so 2 years after she passed, I ended up in this very deep depression, and decided to start, that I needed to start seeking my own help in a way. And with that help, I've become a lot more aware of myself. And so I notice these things, right? Of like, oh, I wasn't processing, or, oh, I was in denial, or, and I would never say that I had been depressed before that. But so I guess to answer your question, I went through that traumatic experience losing my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Later, decided to get help, see a therapist, had to work through some things. And through that experience, have been working back through the younger years because, you know, I lost my mom. And so there's all these questions I have of, well, what happened when I was this old? And what, you know, what started that fight when I was little? And I'm trying to put pieces together with half the puzzle, which has been heartbreaking and hard.
Absolutely.
And so I've pieced together other elements of trauma in my younger life and actually have learned, okay, this depression 3 years ago was by far not my first depression. But in children, depression and anxiety can look very different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Did this motivate you to get into the trauma aware, or was that just part of your path already?
Losing my mom got me on the road of yoga and healing. After I lost her, I started going to a yoga studio in Loveland, Colorado. And 60 minutes out of the week, I was okay. And I was there.
Yeah.
And I became fascinated, you know, and I was by no means an avid yogi, but, you know, I look back at myself now and I'm like, okay, I was definitely not in my body. You know, I was looking around like, why are they breathing like that? You know, all these things when you're just starting and you're like, what is going on? But I felt like I was getting benefits to my psychological realm. And in addition, you know, it was a great physical activity, but that was by no means why I went into yoga or why I kept doing it. So I became a yoga teacher. And on my first day, I felt like, you know, my mom had died from a heart incident. So in my mind, I was like, you know, well, maybe if she would have done yoga, maybe she would have been healthier or better, right? And I guess not better, but healthier. And if I could feel this type of peace and this type of healing, then I was super motivated that I needed to share this with as many people as I possibly could. And I needed to, you know, become this movement. And ever since I was a kid, you know, it was like 1 year I was going to be this when I grew up. And 1 year I was going to be this, you know, I think until I was like 24, my parents were like, all right, like, what's this year, you know? And when I finally was like, this is it, I'm going to go become a yoga teacher. It was just, that was the path. That was where I was meant to be. And I've never batted an eye since. And there hasn't been any doubt or hesitation that I'm on the right path. So the very first day of yoga teacher training, I had just recently moved. So I was going through some boxes, and my mom was an avid list maker. So I came across a list, and very top says what I'm going to do when I retire. And number 1 says, start doing yoga.
Oh, I love that.
It was like, can you get more of a sign from somebody who's not there than that to the first day of class? You know, like,
yeah.
Whoa.
Wow. So, that is so powerful. And that's so inspiring, Lindsay. I'm just in total awe of you. You are a wonderful instructor and a wonderful leader. I've actually talked about the women's circle on this podcast before. So that is absolutely inspiring. And I'm just, you know, so proud of you. And that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah. So that's kind of how the whole path began. And, you know, I know so many people in my life that struggle with anxiety and depression. And I think sometimes we don't even know what we're struggling with, right? We don't even know that we're in a depression. We don't even know that we're feeling anxiety, or we're just not quite in the body. And, you know, that's another area of trauma aware is a lot of times trauma survivors are not in the body. And so we can, through yoga and breathwork meditation, try to help, coming into the body, be fully inside of your skin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I spent a great deal of my life trying to not be in my body. If you go back and listen to the first few episodes, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I had a lot of physical trauma in my life throughout my youth and into my 20s, and did my best to escape through every means possible. And I still have trouble staying in my body. It's not a comfortable place a lot of the time, and that's part of my not very good week at the beginning of this week. Was I was reliving some emotional and physical trauma, and it was very, very painful, both literally and metaphorically. So maybe I need to get back into yoga. When I was a kid, on one of our 3 channels on TV, there was a program called Yoga for Health, and everybody in the family did it. I think the instructor's name was Richard Hiddleman. I may be wrong, but that was long before you guys were born. But it was, yoga's been around for a long, long time. And luckily it was introduced into our culture a long time ago. So I think it's go ahead.
I'm so sorry. It's so interesting. Whenever I tell people I'm a yoga teacher, the first I hear this 9 times out of 10, I can't touch my toes. I can't do yoga. And I always say, it's not about touching your toes. And then they'll even, forward fold there and be like, see, I can't touch them. And I'm like, well, bend your knees and then you can touch them. Well, I thought the goal isn't to bend the knees. The goal is to be what feels right in your body. It doesn't need to look a certain way or be a certain way. It just needs to be right for you.
I've always felt that with yoga. Even when I lived next to Steve there, I would bike to a yoga studio, and I've always gone to, and Lindsay, you know this too, I've always gone to restorative classes and more classes that are directed towards healing. And it's always been a mental thing for me. I feel like yoga has always been more of a mental release. I mean, it's also a physical release because we do carry a lot of stress and, anxiety in our body. But I've always been attracted to, the restorative types of yoga and yin yoga, just for that exact reason, that mental release.
It's so interesting that you say that, because a lot of times we can see newer students, for instance, might have a tougher time getting out of their head in classes that create a lot of room for silence.
True.
So you put somebody into a posture for 5 minutes and their brains are just on their grocery list and what they didn't do this morning and what they need to do tomorrow. And like I said, we still want to hold that space, right, for silence, because sometimes that silence is important. But yeah, it definitely takes practice to be able to sit in silence and not have thoughts just rampantly floating through the mind.
It takes practice, though.
Absolutely.
So, one of the things that I've talked about in many other places is I used to teach meditation, and I was taught by some amazing meditators, for lack of a better word. But one of them, his name was Jim, and I think we talked about that probably on one of the episodes. And he would always say, Steve, that's why they call it practice. You don't just sit down and commune with God in the first 5 minutes. This is something you need to do on a regular basis. get to where, wherever you want to go, wherever you want your journey to go. And I think, the preconceived notions of both meditation and yoga and other spiritual and physical practices is that we want to be perfect the first time we do it.
Right.
And it doesn't work that way.
That's me. Must be perfect.
Yeah, the whole touching, I can't touch my toes. That's the epitome of why people probably don't go when they would really like to.
Right.
What do you say to those people?
I say it's not about touching your toes. And I usually go off about how I do yoga for mental health, and that, the physical restrictions, those are just temporary, just arrive to your mat, see what happens, and be open-minded without judgment.
There you go.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Do people ever ask, how long until I'm good?
I guess I've probably got that question once or twice. The question I usually get is, how often should I come to receive the benefit? And I would say that anytime you come to your mat, you're receiving the benefit, right? But I found for myself that going to yoga once a week changed my life considerably.
Wow.
That's all I needed to, it was like a date with myself every week. I showed up, it was a quiet space. It was, the ambiance and the environment was right for me. And, I encourage people, anybody that's looking into doing yoga, try a lot of places and figure out what really feels right to you. Not every place is meant for you. Yeah. There's enough yoga for everybody.
Absolutely. So I kind of have a question going back to trauma a little bit. So is trauma something that you can recover from?
So there are studies that are showing that we can move past trauma, and it takes work and commitment and open-mindedness to doing that. I guess, speaking for myself, I feel like I'm still recovering from trauma, but we like to use the term survivor as opposed to victim.
I love that.
And I think anytime you can bring awareness to the trauma that is psychological and physical, just being aware of it in your own body is already the road and the beginning to healing and moving forward from that.
Awesome. Okay.
So I'd like to shift gears a little bit to some things that interested me in your bio, and that is herbalism and aromatherapy. They're two interests of mine, and I ingest a lot of herbal therapies, and I have all the oils, all the tons of them. I'm a big fan of that, and yet I know absolutely nothing about it. So I often will hear someone say, well, Steve, you should try valerian or whatever, for this or that, or frankincense, and put that on your feet. It'll keep you grounded. So tell us about your experience with that. What do you is becoming part of your practice? Tell me everything.
Yes. Okay. I can nerd out on herbs now.
Yay.
So I have been studying to become a certified master herbalist for about 3 years. I'm doing a go at your own pace type of thing. So it's, it's definitely going at my own pace, but I'm honestly very happy that it is taking some time, because I really feel, and I get, from the shamanistic background, you really have to create a relationship with the plant. You can't just, whip up a Wikipedia document and say, okay, well, I know how to work with this plant now. It takes time. You have to build a relationship. When I was in college, I thought I wanted to work with animals. I was a biology major, and I thought for sure I was going to go on to work with animals. And turns out that I found a love of plants. There's nothing more invigorating than watching something grow. It's therapeutic too.
It is.
So I've really taken my time with herbalism and learning about all the different plants and medicine and histories, backgrounds, growing conditions, harvesting, all those things. I actually just tore up my entire front yard in the fall and am planting an urban farm in my house. So, around my house. So I'm hoping to have quite the epic herb garden this year. What I did is I went through and I picked herbs that touched on specific ailments that kind of was very diverse throughout the body. So something that helped digestion, something that helped anxiety, something that helped circulation, something that helped sleep. And so, I'm super passionate about working with plants. And about 4 years ago, I decided to go pretty much chemical free. I try to be as chemical free as possible. And when you do that, you ultimately end up at this all natural plant-based modality. And I'm just, I love plants and herbs. I think it's therapy from the very beginning. It's therapy from the moment you plant the seed to the moment that you are harvesting that plant and using it. It's intentional. I have actually a really great book that I have been reading. It's called Plant Spirit Medicine by 𝗦𝗂𝗯𝘀𝗰𝗹. And it just takes it to the next level of that spiritual connection to the plant and honing in on, like, we need to talk to our plant and ask it for something, right? From that shaman background, kind of similar ideas there. So
that's really cool.
That's awesome.
My first career was landscape contractor, and it was the perfect career for me because I was down on my knees with my hands in the dirt, growing things. Although there were a lot of other aspects, but that was my favorite thing. And I had tons of plants, and I have a green thumb, and I can grow just about anything anywhere. And KB, you'd be so proud of me. I finally dug up the garden.
Yes.
And it's all ready, and I've planted my plants, and I have room for some herbs.
Oh.
So, Lindsay, what? Give me a couple of herbs that I should plant, and I'm going to develop a relationship with them.
Oh, perfect. Well, one of my favorite herbs is skullcap. I don't know if you've heard of that name before. I love working with this herb. I don't know. It's really called to me. I try to put it as many things as I can. Helps with sleep, helps with anxiety. Nettles, stinging nettle is another great one. It can be an antihistamine. So if you have allergies, I actually infuse nettles into apple cider vinegar. And I have cats. And so sometimes my friends come over and have allergies, and I go, oh, here, just like a shot of apple cider vinegar, but there's some herbs in there, and works every time.
Cool.
Obviously, disclosure, do your research, make sure that there's no contraindications with any herbs that you're using, and do do your studies and make sure that it's right for you. Sometimes blood pressure medication or thyroid or those types of medications can have some effects. But
yeah. So don't rely on Wikipedia for all your information. That's my favorite website.
I have kind of a funny story about stinging nettle, actually. So I grew up in Washington, where there's stinging nettle is just rampant there. And I remember I got hit in the face with some stinging nettle while I was at like 6th grade sleepaway camp. And our camp counselor was a little strange, but he said to pick up a banana slug. If you rub like the slime of the slug, it actually numbs. Like it numbed my whole face. Like my whole face was lopsided from this banana slug slime. Oh. But I couldn't feel the stinging nettle anymore. So that was, anyway. That was really random story, but yeah. So if you ever get slapped in the face with some stinging nettle, get a banana slug.
Get yourself a banana slug.
Get yourself a banana slug.
They do not have them here in Prescott. That's
no. I don't think they have them in Colorado either.
No.
I think it may be a Washington and northern.
That's a West Coast thing, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, so we're about the end of our time here. So, KB, any other last questions for Lindsay?
No, I'm super satisfied with everything we hit. I can't wait to learn more from you. Maybe we can get you on for another episode to talk more about that herbalism and so that would be awesome. And aromatherapy.
Yeah.
Aromatherapy. There we go.
That too.
Gosh.
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah. Awesome.
Lindsay, any final words?
Well, I hope that by being here with you both, kind of just full circle how you said, how can we take this out into the world, and just by sharing and having this opportunity to help create awareness is something I'm passionate about. I'm so happy to have the opportunity to have done that with you both. And I love your mission of mental health and hot mess. It just sounded like it resonated on a level. So.
Well, it was
awesome.
Really wonderful speaking with you and learning about all this. I learned a lot of new things I didn't know anything about. And I admire your mission and all the work you're doing towards it. It's amazing. I'm going to tell people that in the show notes, we're going to have links to her website, wanderlotusyogaandwellness.com, her Facebook page, Instagram, LinkedIn. Those will all be in the show notes. So go and check out her websites and social media sites. And if you're in Colorado, look up Lindsay and go to a yoga class and feel better.
We're going to soon have a women's wellness retreat coming to Costa Rica. So we're going to be in Colorado pretty soon. We're going to be international.
All right.
Awesome. Could you tell us just a little brief tidbit for our listeners in case any of them are interested in going to a retreat?
Yes. So I have 2 retreats coming up, actually. One is going to be for the summer solstice in June. And that'll be in Estes Park, Colorado. And then I have one coming up in Costa Rica in Nosara, which is actually a blue zone. So there's 5 blue zones in the world, and this is one of them. So it's just a very healthy, conscious place to live. People tend to live in these areas a lot longer. And Costa Rica is like my second home. So this has to happen. But we are nailing down final details currently. The website will definitely be updated as it comes along, but just really an immersion to bring women together, focus on wellness, self-love, healing, immersing people into the culture and ocean therapy, all the things.
That.
Sounds fabulous.
Yeah, so stay tuned.
All right. And now,
awesome.
So updates will be on your website, and the links to the website will be in the show notes. So people go check that out. All right. Wow, that was a great episode. This has been the Hot Mess Therapy podcast with Stephen, KB, and our fabulous guest, Lindsay. Thank you again so much for being here. And namaste.
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 Thank you.
Well, I sure learned a lot from Lindsay, and I hope you did as well. There wasn't any challenge this time, but if you want one, start a small garden or a big one if you want, and plant some medicinal herbs. Make a conscious effort to connect with your plants and see how that goes. You can connect with Lindsay at wanderlotusyogaandwellness.com, facebook.com/wanderlotusyoga, Instagram at wanderlotusyoga, and as usual, the links are in the show notes.
Subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. The link is on the website.
In the next episode of the Hot Mess Therapy podcast, we talk with Cindy Van Arnhem about numerology, wealth activation, how to master yourself, emotional intelligence, and the 3 steps to living a better life with your emotions.
Please be sure to share this with your friends. Submit your hot mess story on the website. Find all the show notes, links, and resources on our website, hotmesstherapypodcast.com. Email us at hotmesstherapypodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.